There's a couple out there who once drove a van to the literal end of the earth, all the way to the southern tip of South America, and then had everything ripped away from them almost overnight. No warning, no backup plan, just gone. And if you used to follow them during the van life era, you might have noticed things looked completely different a year later. The van was gone. The open roads were gone. And suddenly they were up in the mountains of Utah, swinging hammers, hauling lumber, and doing something nobody expected them to do. So what actually happened? How did two people who built an entire identity around freedom and movement end up rooted in one place, building a home from scratch with their bare hands? And why, in the middle of all of that, did everything nearly fall apart? This is the full story of Trent and Allie, and there's a lot more to it than their channel ever let on. Before any of this started, Trent Childs and Allie Miraglia were living what most people would consider a pretty normal, decent life. Trent was based in Salt Lake City, Utah, working as an outdoor gear sales representative. Allie, originally from Washington, D.C., had lived all over, bouncing through Europe, spending time in France, settling briefly in Bozeman, Montana, before a career move eventually brought her to Salt Lake City, too. She was working as a project manager for a healthcare quality improvement organization. Steady job, steady paycheck, predictable future. They met in December 2016 on the dating app Bumble, and almost immediately they realized they were cut from the same cloth. Rock climbing, mountain biking, trail running, hiking. These weren't just hobbies for either of them. This was how they made sense of the world. So naturally, their first dates weren't dinners and movies. They were out in the mountains. 2 days before their very first date, Trent had already bought a van, not because he was planning anything crazy, just so he could take weekend trips without the hassle of setting up a tent. But that van would end up being the match that lit the whole fire. In 2017, the two of them took an 8-week road trip through the Pacific Northwest and Canada. That summer changed everything. Living out of a small space, moving constantly, having almost no possessions, something clicked. The corporate routine they'd both been grinding through suddenly felt like a cage. The idea of going back to a desk full-time felt almost physically painful. They came home, sold that first van, bought a Ram ProMaster, and spent 5 months, while still working their day jobs, converting it into a fully livable home on wheels. The build cost them $50,000. It had a shower, a toilet, hot water, an oven, a fridge, a temperature-controlled furnace, a full espresso setup, and enough solar power to run a blender. This wasn't roughing it. This was a deliberate, carefully designed life. By the summer of 2018, they handed in their resignations, packed their dog Frank into the van, and drove away from everything they'd known. The YouTube channel had actually started in June 2017, initially focused on mountain biking content. But as the van life adventure grew, so did the audience. People weren't just watching for the travel footage. They were watching because Trent and Allie were genuinely likable, unpolished in the right ways, and honest about the hard parts. They weren't pretending van life was perfect. They showed the flat tires, the freezing nights, the mechanical breakdowns, the creative problem-solving when things went sideways. And that honesty resonated. The subscriber count started climbing. They also weren't just cruising through pretty places. They were documenting everything. How to work remotely on the road, how to install solar panels, how to manage finances while traveling, how to cross international borders with a dog. Their channel became a genuine resource for anyone thinking about making the leap themselves. What made it all work was the dynamic between them. Trent was the builder, calm, methodical, always figuring out the mechanical side of things. Allie was the one who could articulate what the life actually felt like, the emotional weight of it, the beauty of it, the cost of it. Together they created something that didn't feel like content. It felt like an honest window into a life most people only dreamed about. And they kept pushing further south, country by country, Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama. They shipped the van from Panama to South America in a container, which alone was a logistical challenge that would have broken most people. Then Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Chile, all the way down through Argentina to Ushuaia, the southernmost city on Earth, where the road literally ends at the bottom of the continent. They had driven from Canada to the end of the world. That's not an exaggeration, that is the actual thing they did. In the middle of all that travel, something quietly important happened. On May 31st, 2019, while they were exploring archaeological sites in Central America, Trent got down on one knee at the top of the ancient Mayan ruins at Tikal in northern Guatemala. In one of the most breathtaking settings on the planet, he asked Allie to marry him. She said yes. It was a moment that perfectly captured what their whole journey had become, a life built entirely outside the expected script, in places most people never see, doing things most people never do. No fancy restaurant, no planned-out production, just two people on top of a pyramid that had stood for over 1,000 years. Their audience lost their minds over it. The comment sections exploded, because by that point, people weren't just casual viewers anymore. They were genuinely invested in these two. The van life community had grown massively, and Trent and Allie were considered some of its most authentic voices. But what nobody knew in that moment was that everything was about to change, and not in a gradual, planned way, in the kind of way that leaves you no choice. By early 2020, Trent and Allie had made it all the way to the very bottom of South America. They reached Ushuaia in Argentina, the end of the road, the last city before Antarctica. It was the milestone they'd been building towards for 2 years. And then they started heading back north. They got as far as Buenos Aires, and that's where it stopped. COVID-19 shut the world down in March 2020 with almost no warning. Borders slammed shut across Latin America. International flights were being canceled in real time. The situation was deteriorating fast, and being stranded in a foreign country with an expensive van and no clear path home was suddenly a genuine emergency. They had to make one of the hardest decisions of their van life journey: abandon the van entirely and get on a plane back to the United States while they still could. Everything they had built, the custom home they'd spent $50,000 constructing, the vehicle that had been their entire world for almost 2 years, left behind in Argentina. They made it back to Allie's family in Washington, D.C., just in time. They documented the chaos across 3 separate videos, trying to escape, abandoning the van, and the nerve-shredding wait to even get on a flight home. Tens of thousands of people watched those videos. Because it wasn't just Trent and Allie's story, it was the story of an entire generation of travelers whose lives had just been switched off overnight. The van life era, as they had known it, was over. When the dust settled, they had a choice to make. A lot of people in their position would have waited, rented somewhere, sat tight until travel opened up again, maybe pivoted to a different kind of content to keep the views coming. Trent and Allie did something else entirely. They'd been taking occasional trips to Utah throughout their travels, visiting family, reconnecting with the mountains they both loved. And during those visits, an idea had been quietly forming. What if they bought land? What if they actually built something? Not a van this time, a real home, from scratch. They found a plot of land in the mountains of Utah sitting at around 8,000 feet elevation. Remote, beautiful, brutally difficult to build on. They had never built a house before. Neither of them had any formal construction training. The contractor quotes they received for the build came in at close to $420,000. So they made the call to do as much of it themselves as physically possible. They hired professionals to excavate and pour the foundation, and then they took over almost everything else. What followed was one of the most grueling, humbling, relentless stretches of their entire story. They moved into a trailer on the property, and lived there through a Utah mountain winter, through 8 feet of snow, while they built. Materials were constantly delayed because delivery trucks could barely navigate the mountain roads in winter conditions. They had to learn every trade from scratch: framing, electrical, plumbing, insulation, and then learn it again when they got it wrong. At one point, they had to replumb the entire house 2.5 times. Not once, 2.5 times. Anyone who's ever dealt with a leaky pipe knows how miserable that is. Now imagine doing it in the middle of a half-finished house at altitude in winter, while also trying to keep a YouTube channel running. But the channel didn't stall. If anything, the building content pulled in a completely different audience. People who had followed them for the van life adventure stayed. New viewers who were interested in DIY construction and homesteading started showing up. The comments went from van goals to house goals. The energy of the community had shifted, but the connection was still there. Somewhere in the middle of all of that construction, the chaos, the learning curves, the frozen mornings in a trailer, Allie found out she was pregnant. They were in the most demanding stretch of the build, inspections looming, deadlines self-imposed, the house still very much unfinished, and now, on top of everything else, they were going to be parents. They set a goal: get their occupancy certificate before the baby arrived. On June 27, 2020, in a small, quiet ceremony with just their immediate families and Trent's grandparents present, they got married. No big event, no crowd, just the two of them, officially, surrounded by the people who mattered most. It was very them. The pregnancy pushed forward alongside the build. Every inspection passed, every delay overcome, and then on November 4, 2021, Leo arrived, 6 weeks ahead of schedule. Allie had started feeling contractions the evening before, on her birthday. The next afternoon, Leo was born at 36 weeks, premature and not in a stable condition. He was life-flighted to Primary Children's Hospital, one of the top pediatric hospitals in the country, where he spent time in the NICU fighting through serious breathing difficulties. Allie later said she believed Leo had decided to show up early so he could share the final inspection on the house. 1 week after Leo was born, they received their occupancy certificate. It's the kind of detail that stops you cold. The house they'd been building through 2 winters, through a pandemic, through abandoning their old life entirely, finished, certified, livable, 1 week after their son came into the world. Leo recovered, he came home, and the family that Trent and Allie had been quietly building across years of chaos and reinvention finally had a place to land. The channel didn't slow down after all of that. If anything, it found a second gear. Today, Trent and Allie sit at nearly 500,000 subscribers with over 165 million total views. They upload regularly, long-form videos, often running over 30 minutes, that document life on the mountain homestead. The build content has evolved into homestead content, maintaining the property, new projects, the ongoing reality of raising a young family in a remote mountain setting. The thing that made people fall in love with them during van life, the honesty, the grit, the willingness to show failure alongside success, is still fully present. They didn't reinvent themselves for the algorithm. They just kept documenting what their actual life looked like, and their actual life kept being worth watching. Their dogs are still part of the story too. Frank the Blue Heeler, who rode in a van from Canada to Argentina, now runs around a mountain homestead in Utah. They added a German Shepherd named Lika along the way. The whole operation feels like a natural evolution rather than a pivot. The same people, the same values, a completely different setting. What's remarkable when you look at the full arc of their story is how little of it was planned. They didn't set out to be van lifers. They didn't plan to get stranded in South America. They didn't intend to build a house at 8,000 feet with no construction experience. And they certainly didn't schedule a premature birth to coincide with their final inspection, Life just kept throwing the next chapter at them, and they kept showing up for it. That's really what their channel has always been about. Not the van, not the house, not any specific lifestyle or trend. It's about two people who decided the corporate script wasn't for them, and then committed fully and repeatedly to figuring out what was. Most people who feel that way never do anything about it. Trent and Allie just kept driving. There is something worth sitting with at the end of this story. Trent and Allie aren't famous because anything dramatic or scandalous happened to them. Nobody blew up their channel with a controversy. There was no falling out, no public drama, no implosion. What happened to them is something much rarer. They kept reinventing themselves, kept choosing difficulty over comfort, and kept being honest about it on camera. They built a community not around a niche, but around a philosophy, that it's never too late to live outside the expected box, that freedom looks different at different stages of life, and that the scariest decisions usually turn out to be the most important ones. The van is gone. The open roads of Latin America are in the past. But the thing that made those roads meaningful in the first place, that restlessness, that refusal to settle for a life they didn't actually want, that's still there every time they upload. And if you've been watching from the beginning, you already know. Whatever comes next for Trent and Allie, they'll figure it out. They always do.